Trevor, let's talk about the Miami defense because this is a unit that you want to talk about ifs. This is the biggest if on their football team. I actually think their offense is still going to be pretty good. The question is, how good? Is it going to be anywhere close to what it was last year? But will it be good enough with what the issues were in defense? So, as I think Miami is going to be better on defense. The question is how much. I don't think Miami's going to be as good on offense. The question is how much. And what you need to make sure of is that any regression you have on offense from a scoring, yards, whatever standpoint is not as much as is less than what your improvement is on defense.
Sure.
This is the side of the ball that is going to ultimately determine just how good Miami is going to be this season. Obviously, defensively, they made some changes from last season. They got rid of Lance Guidry. They hired Corey Heatherman, and we're going to pull up some numbers here from the Miami defense, Trev, and it's going to show that Miami's a team that in some ways needs a lot of work. Their scoring average last year their yards per game ranked 27th. Their rushing yards ranked 19th. Those numbers are a little bit misleading, and we'll dive into that to show that why. But they did rank last season 68th in scoring. And when you break down Miami's results last year, they were they looked to be pretty good on defense early. So when you look at the numbers and you say, okay, well, they gave up only 25.3 points per game. Well, they only gave up 41 total points in the first 4 games, period. So when you look at Miami's results for the season, yes, they gave up 25.3 points per game. But if you actually look at it after the first 4 games, it was pretty bad. They gave up 32 points per game in their last 9 games. They gave up over 30 to Virginia Tech, Cal, Louisville, Duke, Syracuse, and Iowa State. And then also gave up 28 points in a loss to Georgia Tech. Their defense is going to have to get a lot better, and it's in ways that I think go beyond the statistics because, again, I think Miami had some performances last year where they looked really good against some inferior opponents. Their numbers on the whole were not that great. They held Florida A&M, for example, to 190 yards. They were pretty terrible on offense. They held Ball State to 115 yards last season, and they held Wake Forest, who wasn't very good last year, to 193 yards. Outside of those 3 games, they gave up 375.5 yards per game. That's a 50-point jump based on the numbers right there if you just take out those 3 games. Now, you could talk to a lot of teams. If they take out their top 3 games, they're not going to be as good. But when it has that big of a jump, it shows you that your stats were padded by beating some relatively inferior opponents.
100%.
And they're going to need to get a lot better this season. I mean, if you look at it, from the Virginia Tech game on, you go up 6 yards a play, 7.6 yards a play to Cal, 6.2 to Louisville. You shut down a Florida State offense that was terrible, and a Wake Forest offense that was terrible. You go up 6 yards a play to Duke. You gave up 5.8 to Georgia Tech, 6.8 to Syracuse, 6.2 to Iowa State. Those are bad numbers. Bad numbers, Trev. And this is the side of the ball that's going to have to get better. And if Miami's going to improve. Now, the good news is you hired a coach in Corey Heatherman, who had success last season coordinating a pretty good defense. Minnesota last season ranked 3rd in the Big Ten in total defense. They only gave up 285.7 yards per game. They were 4th in the league at 4.8 yards per play. They also ranked 4th in the Big Ten at only giving up 16.9 points per game. So they went out and got a young coordinator that had success kind of quickly rebuilding that Minnesota defense. They're going to need him to get this thing rolling immediately at Miami. The good news is he walks into a situation where there's some pretty good talent up front, which should help him. But Miami is going to have to get a lot better at a lot of things, tackling, not cover. Their pass defense last season was bizarre. There were times they looked pretty good, and times you're like, how are you giving up those kind of blown coverages? They were a very odd team last year, and if they're going to make a run this year, they're going to have to make major improvements on the defensive side of the ball after losing their entire secondary. Your best linebacker, Francisco Mauanoa. You lost Tyler Barron on your defensive line, who had 11 tackles for loss last season, and you lost Simeon Barrow from your team last. So they had some losses on both sides of the ball. They have talent coming back, but they're going to have to get a lot better on defense and in a hurry.
Yeah, this is the side of the ball that kind of holds Miami's season in balance. And you go and you look, and it's just you look at the overall makeup of the team. The offense is going to take a step back statistically. And I'm not saying they're going to be bad, but they're not going to score 43.9 points per game. I would be shocked if they were able to maintain that. They're not going to have the number 3 passing offense in the country, and in certain moments, they're not going to have Cam Ward to bail them out of some of those close game scenarios. So they need the defensive side of the ball to step up. It cannot be the same as what it was. There has to be some improvement, and I do think it will be improved, partially because I don't know in certain games how much worse it could get. I mean, your offense against Louisville scored 52 points, and you won by a touchdown.
Right.
It was a good Louisville offense, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But that game, there might as well not have even been a defense on the field for either team. But defensively, they need to step it up. I do like the Corey Heatherman hire. If there's one thing that PJ Fleck and them had going for him at Minnesota, they did have good defenses year in and year out for the most part. So I do like that hire. I like what their front four is made up of. A lot of questions in the secondary. I know we'll touch on that. But, yeah, defensive line, if their front four can get home, it's going to be they're going to be a better defense for sure.
Schematically, the thing about Corey Heatherman that I think makes sense for that hire is he's like very different than Al Golden, for example. He is a lineup, get in your set, be sound, be physical, be gap conscious, fly to the football. It's not we're going to blitz from all over the place. We're going to, have a million different coverages and a million different pressures, and we're going to run all these line games, because that's what killed Miami last year. Is they were complicated for no reason whatsoever. And that's what would result in just some of the absolute blown coverages and terrible gap fits and things like that. With Corey Heatherman saying, listen, we're Miami. We got talent. We don't need to design a million different pressures to try to – no, we got a great D-line. Let them attack. We have talented linebackers. Let them run to the football. We have long athletic secondary players. Stop asking them to do all the million. Just let them go play football. I'm being a little bit hyperbolic in the simplicity of what he's doing. I'm doing so to make a point that his whole thing is it's not about how smart I am. It's about what my players can do. Since I have players, we're going to line up. We're going to be smart. We're not going to get out leveraged. We're not going to have a bunch of bad run fits. We're going to tackle well. We're going to fly to the football. Like, that's what Miami's going to try to do now, at least based on what he did at Minnesota. And I think that's what you need at a place like Miami. You don't have to scheme your way into success when you have the talent that Miami is going to have. Now, on a national scale, to win a national championship, I do think their talent needs to get better on defense. There's no question, especially on the back end. But it's good enough talent to compete for an ACC championship and maybe win a game or two in the postseason, if they can get everybody on the same page. And that's the biggest if of all. I have far fewer ifs on offense with the receivers by the time we get to the middle of the season. I think they'll be fine, because that's, if you're talented enough and you have good coaching, receivers eventually figure it out. And we saw that even with Notre Dame last year. In the playoffs, who was Notre Dame's two most effective receivers? It was Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse, two sophomores. Like, they'll be okay eventually if they can protect that group enough. Secondary is a little bit of a different animal, because it's not – I don't know that the talent is as good as it is on the offensive side of the ball. And can they cover against some of the better teams? But their talent is still significantly better than a lot of the teams are going to play next year. It's just about getting everybody on the same page. And I feel like his scheme and his emphasis is well-suited for bringing in a bunch of new guys that have to figure it out. Because not only are they going to have a brand new secondary, but their linebacking core is going to look a little bit different this year as well, Trev, because you lost Francisco Mauanoa. You do have I always get his name right. Basanthi. I forgot. I have no clue how to pronounce his name. He comes back. He was a good linebacker last year. You got Muhammad Traore transferring from Rutgers, who in 23 before his knee injury was a really good football player. Raul Aguirre is a kid that I had ranked as a top 100 caliber recruit coming out of high school. There's talent there, but now they're not going to ask them to do as much as they did last year. They're going to put more trust in the D-line than they did last year. And I think that's what's going to help Miami have a chance to improve on defense, is let the D-line work. Don't put as much on them. Let the players in the back end keep things in front of them and run to the football. I think if they do that, they're going to be improved on defense. How much, that remains to be seen, but they're going to at least be better. And that's what I think Corey Heatherman was brought in to do on defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you have this mixed bag of transfers and younger players that are coming up in the ranks, simplicity is going to be what's needed. And I'm always a big fan of simplicity, especially when you're going through some sort of coaching change, because you have your coordinators like a Jim Knowles, like an Al Golden, that it takes a couple seasons for it to really start to click. But one of the benefits of that we've heard about Chris Ash is that, hey, this is a very simple form of you kind of take one thing at a time instead of, hey, here's everything. And it's more like baptism under fire type deal. It's like, hey, we're going to knock out one thing at a time. Sounds like that's a lot of what Corey Heatherman wants to do. That'll ease the burden of having a lot of transfers coming into your defense. But it's going to be interesting to see how it all comes together. That's for sure.
What I'm interested in is how good is Miami's run defense going to be? They were the weirdest team in college football last year when you watch what their film looked like with their run defense compared to their numbers. Because if you look at their numbers, they were a pretty good run defense last year, Trev. I mean, they gave up 112 yards per game. They gave up 3.8 yards per carry. Like, okay, like, isn't that good? My concern, though, is when you look at who they played. They feasted on a pretty bad schedule of rushing teams. And when they played teams that were pretty good at running the football, they did not do as well. Georgia Tech being an obvious example last season. Virginia Tech being another one.
It's also the flow of the game, too. I mean, Miami's offense, the way that they were such a high-powered offense that could get a jump on teams that not a lot of teams could afford to just kind of establish a ground game once you immediately go down by 14 points.
Right.
That also plays a factor in it as well. Like, I'd be curious to see what some of the rushing attempt numbers were for some of these teams, in some of these bigger shootout games that are like, okay, yes, on paper, Miami held Louisville to 88 yards rushing. It's like, well, that's because each quarterback had like 600 passing yards or whatever it was. So I'd be interested to see what those numbers were too. But I agree. Miami's rush defense last year was interesting.
Yeah. Hold on a second. So looking at it, Trev, when we look at the strengths of the Miami defense and how they're going to improve, the big question mark is going to be they have to get a lot better in secondary or in pass defense. That's the one area we know they struggled last year, and they're going to have to do so with a brand new secondary. Let's talk a little bit about that secondary because I know you've looked at it a lot. You've done transfer articles. Let's talk a little bit about that secondary and the players that they are bringing in.
Yeah, I mean, their secondary from a season ago, like I said, they lost 4 players that all played over 150 snaps. They lost safety Isaiah Thomas, cornerback Deani Hill. They lost safety Jaden Harris, and they also lost safety Zaquan Patterson. Now, to help combat that, they brought in some transfer players. One of them, unfortunately, left in the spring portal after coming in the winter portal. That's a different conversation for a different day. Hate that any player has the ability to do that, but that was Emmanuel Carnleaf, a cornerback from Arizona, came in the winter, transferred out again in the spring. But they brought in Charles Brantley, a cornerback from Michigan State, who I like. They brought in Xavier Lucas from Wisconsin. We talked about him before. He's one of those players that, he's weird because he has good traits, but doesn't jump off the page at you like, yo, this is going to be a dude. They also brought in Jacoby Thomas, a safety from Tennessee. So a lot of what their projected depth chart is going to be some transfers. I know O.J. Frederick Jr. comes back, I think, in their secondary. As of right now, our lads has them slated to start, but Ethan O'Connor, a redshirt sophomore transfer, is slated to kind of battle him out for that other cornerback position.
I like O'Connor, by the way. He's a tall, long kid. He's a good football player.
But outside of that, there are 4 other starters in the secondary, and they're also including nickelbacks as starters here. Jacoby Thomas, that transfer is starting. Zechariah Poyser is starting, and then Xavier Lucas is also slated to start with Charles Brantley starting in the nickel. So you're going to have a completely new look secondary down in South Beach. So biggest thing is for Corey Heatherman is going to be shoring up the back end of that defense, especially when you have a bunch of new guys. Now enter the simplicity of what his scheme is. Ideally, that's going to help get them kind of all together. Right. And then behind them, you have people who were on the team last year. You have Dylan Day, Markeith Williams, Damari Brown, Jadis Richards. So we'll see what their depth starts to look like. But at the top, it's all going to be made up of transfers.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how they can get those guys going, Trev. And I just real quick while you're doing that, I did a little bit of research. So last year, Miami played 3 teams that ranked in the top 40 in rushing for Cal, Georgia Tech, and Louisville. The rest of their schedule ranked 66, 63rd, 67th, 68th, 69th, 70th, 80th, 81st, 100th, 107th, and 110th in rushing offense last year. So that factored into their numbers and the lack of – I mean, Virginia Tech, who ranked they were the 4th best team on the schedule. They ran for 206, 6.4 per carry. Louisville only ran for 106 yards, but they averaged 5.1 per carry and ran it 21 times because they were down. Miami was on them. That leads to your point about how they used them. And then they did a good job against Cal. They held Cal to only 73 yards. So that was the one performance they did. And then Georgia Tech also ran for 271 against them. Iowa State ranked 110th in rushing last year and ran for 145 yards and 4.7 in that game. So they're going to have to be Florida State ranked 107th in rushing. They gave up 133 and 4.8 in that game. So they're going to have to get better in that regard. But I think that's where allowing the defensive line to be more aggressive in attack is going to, I think, benefit them, which allows their linebackers to kind of run. They were bringing pressures for no reason last year. It's like, I think like Mario Cristobal made Lance Guidry to be the scapegoat for last season and publicly did so, which is a bad look. It's like, you're right. We all know that. You don't have to go out there and throw him under the bus that way. Yeah. We all know that. We watched the games. We know that your defensive coaching was bad. You hired him and you allowed him to come back for a second year. Like, you don't need to. You're the head coach. It stops with you, and that's one of the things I don't like about Mario Cristobal is he'll blame other people for things. Like, dude, you're the head football coach. This is ultimately on you. But he did make the change and brought in Corey Heatherman. And the key is he recognized the change. He brought in it's one thing to fire a coach. That's easy to do. We all knew that Brian Van Gorder needed to go at Notre Dame. Everybody knew Lance Guidry had to go at Miami. The question is, do you recognize why that guy was unsuccessful and then make a change to bring in someone that better fits that? And that's what I think he did with the Corey Heatherman hire.
Sure.
Corey Heatherman is a polar opposite of Lance Guidry schematically and how he runs a defense. Polar opposite. And I think that was a smart hire. I don't like how he went about it, but I think it was a smart move. Looking at the strengths of Miami, there's no question that the defensive line, Trevor, is the strength of this defense. Oh, yeah. I don't think that's any doubt. D tackle and D end are both strong. They've got depth at both positions. They're not just, Bain and I know you had talked earlier when we were doing our all opponent team as Messidor. Akeem Messidor is a kid to keep an eye on, but it's not just those two. There's good depth there. Marquise Lightfoot was a highly ranked recruit. We'll see what he can do. Armando Blunt, Malik Bryant are players that have some good depth players. There is a drop off between the starters and the number twos and defensive end, but the number twos are still good, solid rotation players. Defensive tackle, I think the number 2 depth is actually better. You've got Justin Scott and Ahmed Moten as starters. David Blay is a kid they brought in from Louisiana Tech. I think that's a stronger 3-man rotation where I could see any of those 3 guys being starters for them. They brought in Dante Simpson, who is a bigger kid that is a well-regarded recruit coming in. So I think that's going to be a good part. And I think if Muhammad Traore is healthy and can get caught up in the system, because I am concerned about how late he picked them, if he can be healthy, then they've got a nice rotation at linebacker as well. You've got the returning starter from last year. You had Traore and the success that he had. You know, as I said, I like Raul Aguirre. I think he's a guy, he played a little bit last year, 171 snaps, performed well when he was in there. I think they've got a nice rotation if they can get, if Muhammad Traore is who they had. So their front seven has a chance to be really good this season. And ultimately, when Miami was great, they always had great secondaries, but at the end of the day, they were elite because they could dominate in the box. And this team has a chance to be that. They've got to prove it and be more consistent, play with more consistent effort, execute better. If they can do that, then I think that's where this defense makes improvements this season. And then we're back to the question is how much. But I think Miami could. This is where I think you and I disagree, because I tend to look at the projection. You're more of the show me guy, which is totally fair. But if you just look at it from a pure projection standpoint, there is the talent in the front seven to take a lot of that pressure off of the back four or back five when they're in their nickel stuff. They're going to need that, because a great pass rush and shutting down the run, putting them teams in more pass heavy situations, is how you can protect a secondary that's trying to figure things out. Now, Corey Heatherman's going to have to make sure that they're not going too far with some of their coverage structures early, so they don't have the mistakes, the coverage mistakes that we saw last season.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm high on Miami's defensive line. I think they had a player in my first, second, and like third team on defense for Notre Dame's all-opponent team. So D-line is definitely the strength. It's all going to have to come together, just like it is with any other team. I get real nervous, no matter what group it is, whether it's easy to make the transition or more difficult to make the transition. When you're solely made up of portal kids,
yeah.
It always will make me nervous, no matter the school, no matter the position group. And so if, again, it's able to come together, then we'll see.
But that's why that front seven is so important.
Absolutely.
Because if you're forcing your secondary to play like Notre Dame secondary, you're going to be in trouble. If the secondary can be more sit in front, let things happen, because we're going to be jumping throws because our pass rush is getting there, then that's when they have more success. But if they're sitting there where the quarterback can get into his full drop, right out his play action, make his read, get to his secondary throws, they're going to be in trouble. Because I like the secondary talent. I don't love it. It's not it's not vintage Miami. And that's the one area from a high school recruiting standpoint, Mario Cristobal is going to have to make the biggest improvement. Is you're going to have to recruit better talent on the back end out of high school. Have to. That's a big key for him in his program. Because those are the questions. I mean, linebacker's a question mark in the standpoint of there's a lot of guys, the new player, and guys got to step up. Cornerback and safety, though, how quickly that group can figure it out at all, or if they can at all, is ultimately going to determine whether the defense gets any better or not. Because to your point, Trev, if the secondary is a mess, I don't care how good your front seven is, when you're playing better teams, you're going to get exposed. That's just that's true for everybody. And that's where they're going to have to improve. And we've seen that. We've seen that in the postseason. We've seen secondaries that were good in the regular season because the front seven was so good, and you play some really good offensive line or some really well-coached team that can scheme to protect the quarterback, and all of a sudden you're getting tore up. And we saw that in the postseason multiple times last year. We saw that happen to Oregon secondary. They couldn't get to the quarterback, and their secondary got torched.
Yeah.
You know, we saw that with Tennessee secondary, which that had been a great defense all season, but they couldn't get to the quarterback, and Will Howard destroyed them.
Yeah.
And blown coverages and I mean all types of stuff, because now you've got to now bring pressure, do more things you haven't been doing all year, and that's when you make mistakes. It's going to be interesting. Very interesting. So Trev, those are kind of that's an overview of Miami. You know, it's a team that's a very intriguing team, very unique. There's people that have them top 10. There's people that have them outside the top 25. Not just you, but you're not alone in that regard. It's a team that's got a very wide gap between what they are and what they could be.
Yeah.
And that's why I say this is going to show how good of a coach Mario Cristobal is going to be. Because I think you would say, especially since you're more of a skeptic of Miami, if they're 10-2 going into the postseason, that I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that means you think Mario Cristobal did a pretty good job coaching this team up. If they're 10 at the end of the year against the schedule they play.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll look back and say, look, that defensive line hire or the defensive coordinator hire panned out well. the receivers did enough. Like the receivers were what Notre Dame's receivers were last year, stepped up in the moments that they need to, but they were a run-heavy team. That's a good coaching job by Mario Cristobal. A really good job to get that team there, for sure.
If you're 10-2 against a schedule where you got to play Notre Dame, Florida, Louisville, Syracuse, and NC State at home, and then you've got to play at Florida State, at SMU, at Virginia Tech, and at Pitt, if you're 10-2 against that schedule, you did a pretty darn good coaching job, in my opinion.
No doubt.
And I think that's the expectation, is your town is good enough. Like, I'm sorry, you should not be getting out-talented by SMU. You should not be getting out-talented by Louisville or Virginia Tech or Pitt. It's one thing to get out-talented by Notre Dame. That happens to a lot of people. It's another thing to get out-talented, even by Florida State to a degree, or just outplayed by Florida State if, let's say, they're better, or a team like Florida, for example. But some of those tougher late-season games, you're still Miami. You're still in year 4 at Miami. You need to be able to say, our dudes are still better than your dudes. The problem with Miami last year is there were games with their dudes better than the other team's dudes, but the dudes with the headsets on the other side were way better than the dudes on the headsets on the Miami side. And that's where I think that Corey Heatherman hire could be impactful. Is if you're the coach that Miami fans hope you are, this is a season where 10-2 should be the floor of what your team is. I'm not saying that's what the floor of what they'll be, but this roster should still, just pure talent, is still better than probably at least 8 teams on their schedule, if not more. But now you got to coach them up and put them in position to be successful. So, Trev, we'll have more of a Miami prediction when we do our ACC preview. What, though, is your floor and what is your ceiling for Miami in 2025?
Are we talking record or how far they'll go? Or yes?
Both. Yeah. Like floor. And then, so like if your record is this, where do you see their postseason going? It doesn't have to be, I see them in the quarterfinals. Just, are they a playoff? Are they in the ACC title game? Are they in the playoff? That kind of thing. So, and then record driving that.
Yeah, I think the floor of this team, I would say, is 9-3 competing for the ACC championship. We saw last year a 3-loss ACC team play for the conference championship. I think that's well within reach of what Miami's capable to do. The back half of their schedule is rough. Once they leave the state of Florida, you don't have a lot of easy games in there to get through. Not over the top tough games, but similar to Notre Dame's schedule, right? Where it's like just week in and week out in the tail end of your schedule, you're just playing good quality football teams. And that's kind of when Miami has shown that they've struggled before in the past. Like, how do you drop that game to Syracuse? How did you drop that game to a Georgia Tech? Both of those teams last year, they weren't over the top juggernauts, but they were good quality football teams. Can Mario Cristobal keep his team focused for 12 regular season games? We'll see. But I do think that would be the floor, but I do think 9-3 puts them in contention for an ACC championship, like to play for the ACC.
There's a possibility that a 9-3 Miami team has only got one conference loss.
Yeah.
I actually think that they'll split Notre Dame and Miami, or Florida. I mean, I don't think they'll lose both. Like, obviously, I think they're going to lose to Notre Dame. I think they still got a shot to beat Florida at home. I think that's a game they can win. Yeah. And then now you're getting to where if they have 3 losses, there's 2 conference losses, which still, as you said, puts them in position to still play for the ACC championship. Clemson lost, last year had 1 conference loss, and then SMU didn't have any. So they at least have a shot there. But the floor for me for Miami is I could see them. I think you have said this before, and I could see this team, or I know some people in our chat during our Bison Holds have mentioned this. I could see this team really struggling and falling apart a little bit because you have so many portal guys that if you have a couple bad losses early, there's a checkout aspect to it. We've seen that with portal teams. We saw that with Florida State last year. No, they weren't good, but there was a lot of checking out being done by guys that had only been there for a year or 2. So you got to get one of those big early season wins. Otherwise, you're talking about a team that, let's say they lose to Notre Dame, and then let's say they lose to one of Florida State, Louisville, or Florida. And now all of a sudden you're sitting here at 4-2, and you've still got to play at SMU, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt. now all of a sudden it's like, where's your psyche at? Or heaven forbid they lose 3 of those games. So it's like those are things that you look at and say, that's why those early season wins are so important. That's why beating Florida is important. That's why beating Florida State in Tallahassee is important. Because if this Miami team can build some confidence, that makes them much more capable of having what they need mentally to go down to Dallas and Fort Worth area and beat SMU, to beat Louisville again at home this year, to go up into the cold, because now all of a sudden you're talking, is this a mentally tough enough team that they go up to in the mountains of Virginia in November? Can they go in the mountains of Pennsylvania in November when it's cold and maybe snowy and have the mental toughness to say, hey, we're going to go out there and we've got something to play for. We're going to finish this thing strong. I think the early season success is what they need. They need to have one of those big wins. Florida State, they've got to win those games. If they can get rolling, then this Miami team becomes hard to stop. And then they are what you're talking about, a potential 10-2, 11-1 team that's playing for the ACC title. And if they're doing that, then I do think they have enough talent to beat Clemson, because they're the one team in the SEC, in the ACC, that in a ACC title matchup against Clemson can say, we're not afraid of you in the trenches.
Yeah.
There aren't many that can do that. Miami can, if they answer some of those questions. They can say, you're not going to out-athlete us. You're not going to beat us up in the trenches. We can go toe-to-toe with you in the trenches. And that's what I think gives Miami a chance, if they can answer those questions of winning the ACC this year, or at least playing with Clemson. But that's a lot of ifs. They got to prove that. And that's what makes them so unique. They have the biggest floor versus ceiling gap to me of all the top teams in the ACC. Like Louisville's not going to go 6-6 this year. They're better coached than that. Miami could. Miami could also win the ACC. And anyone outside of just a pure Miami homer knows exactly why there's that variance.
Yep.
I lean more towards, I think they answer some of those questions. I do. But now we'll see. But I think that's a big floor versus gap. Like A&M, not nearly as big of a floor versus ceiling gap to me.
No, out of all of my teams, the 2 teams that I think have the most variance in their season is Miami and LSU for me in my rankings that I have. Like
your top 25 you're talking about?
Yep. Miami is.
Explain that.
Meaning
difference for you.
Yeah. So in different lights, I have LSU ranked. I view LSU like how Bryan is viewing Miami. I think a lot of those questions get answered. And I've said this all along, Brian Kelly will just have that random season. Could this be the one? Timeline-wise, it's lining up for when he did it at Notre Dame. It's lining up for when he did it at Cincinnati. Maybe. But it would not at all shock me if they're out of the top 15 and out of playoff contention talk come November. Wouldn't surprise me either, because of his track record at LSU. On the flip side, I don't have Miami ranked in my preseason top 25. This is a team that I don't know if you've caught the drift the last hour and 15 minutes. I'm not high on this team, truly. But I'm also not oblivious to the fact that I could be very well absolutely wrong because of the things that we talked about today. And so I'm saying that those 2 teams for me have the most room for variance. Whereas I think I don't think I ranked Michigan. What's a team that I had ranked? Okay. Like another team that I had ranked somewhere in there is like Iowa State. I think I had ranked it like 24th. I don't think Iowa State's going to win the Big 12. I also don't see them going like 5-7. Like
right.
They're going to be somewhere in like the 7-5 to 9-3 range. And it's not much of that, but Miami, would it at all shock me if they went 10-2, 11-1 and won the ACC? No. Would it shock me if they went 6-6? No. And so that's what I mean by, in my top 25 rankings, they're the team with the most variance that I have out of all of the top 25.
So end of the day, if you had to make a prediction today, what's your prediction for Miami?
I think as of today, I think Miami's going to go 8-4 and miss out, or 8-4 to, I think they're going to go 8-4. Sorry, because I had to count for out of conference stuff. I think they're going to go 8-4, but still have a shot to play for the ACC title.
I have them at 9-3 in the same boat. I think they head into that Virginia Tech Pitt thing at the end of the year with a chance to, if they win out and one team loses, they've got a shot to get into the ACC championship game. That's where it's at. I think beating Notre Dame would be huge for them, confidence
Yeah.
booster wise. But I honestly think just being in a 4-quarter game against Notre Dame is something that staff could use and say, hey, listen, we went toe to toe with the national runners up, preseason top 5 team, and we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I think there has to be like a competitive, close football game for them. If they do that, I think that helps them then go have confidence to say we can beat Florida.
Yeah.
Again, they just need to make sure they don't overlook Florida because of how bad they beat them last year. This is a much better Florida team than the one they played the first game of the year last year.
Oh,
that's going to be important for them. Very important.
For sure.
We did have a super chat that I want to get to here before we get out of here, Trev. My guy, Devon Bailey, says Adon Schuler is really going to have a breakout season this year. Mark my words. Devon, I'm going to tell you right now, first of all, appreciate the super chat. Second of all, these cats are not dudes that you need to convince that Adon Schuler is going to have a breakout year.
No.
I think you're absolutely spot on it. And there's 2 reasons why. One is, obviously, Adon had a pretty darn good redshirt freshman year, first year as a starter. And number 2, I'm a big believer in guys that have seen it being done at a high level and before them. We talk about how important that's been at Notre Dame in the offensive line, how important it was for Ronnie Stanley to spend a year on the same team, 2 years on the same team with actually it was 1 year. He was a freshman at 13, but to have that year of playing with Zach Martin and Chris Watt, and then the importance of Quentin Nelson to be able to be on a team that had a Ronnie Stanley, and then you go down the line, how important it was for Liam Eichenberg to be on a team for 2 years with Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey, and how that legacy builds. Well, in the case of Adon Schuler, getting to play next to Xavier Watts all year was huge for him. Being in the room and seeing how Xavier Watts prepares and studies and goes about his business for 2 years is going to be huge for Adon. And I think benefited him last year a great deal on top of his own ability. You and I have said before, and I'm okay putting this on the record, I think Adon Schuler is going to be a captain this year.
Yes.
I'll be surprised if he isn't, to be completely honest with you. So that's what we think of him, not just from a production standpoint, but from a leadership standpoint.
Yeah, we absolutely see that the same. Absolutely.
Trev, great show today, man. I enjoyed that. You did an excellent job today. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here?
You got it. Well, hey, listen, show schedule for tomorrow is actually going to be interesting. Irish Invasion is tomorrow, Brian. So will we be back tomorrow at some point?
Probably not.
Okay.
We're going to try to do something over the weekend, but me, you, and Sean Davis are all going to be at Irish Invasion tomorrow, so we won't be doing our normal show at 1:00.
Good deal. Well, listen, whenever we do go live, if we go live this weekend, that is why it is always important to be subscribed to this channel and that notification bell hit so you know whenever we go live. Before you head out of here today, please be sure to hit that like button. Whatever streaming platform you watch this on, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. I believe IB Nation Sports Talk is going live tonight at 5 p.m. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Also, game 1 of the NBA Finals is on tonight. I live in Indianapolis. It's an awesome time to be down here right now. Go, Sirs. Let's hope they get it done. But until the next time, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.